The first body they found that winter had no boots. The second had no tongue. But the third man they pulled from the bitterroot snow was still breathing long enough to whisper one name before he died. Evelyn. For the next 7 days, nobody in the valley dared travel the North Trail. Not after what was waiting in those mountains. And not after people started claiming they heard a woman crying somewhere beyond the timberline after dark. If you've ever wondered how far a man will go after losing everything that once made him human, stay with me. Because the winter Elias Boone carried that wounded girl through the mountains, the bitterroots nearly buried them both alive. The storm arrived early that year. By November of 1881, snow already covered the high ridges west of Missoula. The pine trees bent under the weight of ice, and the rivers moved slow and black beneath thin sheets of freezing crust. Most men came down from the mountain before first hard winter. Elias Boone never did. His cabin sat alone near Blacktooth Ridge, hidden between cliffs and cedar groves, where even hunters avoided camping. The chimney smoke rarely rose before dawn. Some weeks, nobody saw him at all. People in town said grief had turned him strange. 3 years earlier, his wife and little boy froze to death crossing Lolo Pass, while Elias was trapping farther north. By the time he found them, the snow had already buried half the wagon. After that, something inside him closed like a rusted gate. He stopped talking, stopped shaving, stopped coming into town except for salt, bullets, and lamp oil. Even the church pastor gave up trying to visit him. But on the last night of November, something changed. The wind woke him first, not the sound, the smell. Smoke. Elias opened his eyes inside the dark cabin and reached for the rifle beside the bed. His fire had burned low. Frost clung to the corners of the windows. Then he heard it. A horse screaming somewhere outside. Not neighing. Screaming. Elias grabbed his lantern and stepped into the storm barefoot, snow biting instantly into his skin. Wind slammed against his shoulders, hard enough to stagger him sideways. The horse stood near the tree line, half collapsed. Foam covered its neck. Its saddle straps hung loose, dragging through the snow, and tied to the saddle horn with bloody rope was a girl. She looked dead. Her dark coat had frozen solid against her body. Snow covered her hair and eyelashes. One bare hand dangled stiff beside the horse. The animal shuddered once, then collapsed beside her. Elias moved fast. The rope around her wrists had cut deep enough to expose raw flesh underneath. Bruises covered the side of her throat. One cheekbone looked swollen, nearly purple beneath the snow packed against her face. But what stopped him cold was the iron collar around her neck. A chain hung broken from it, like someone had dragged her behind something. Jesus Christ, Elias muttered. The girl's lips moved slightly. He leaned closer. Don't let him find me. Then her eyes rolled back. Elias carried her inside as the storm swallowed the mountain whole. The cabin filled with heat, wet wool, and melting snow. He laid her beside the fire and cut away the frozen coat carefully. Beneath it, she wore expensive clothing ripped nearly to pieces. The kind rich railroad families wore back east. Nothing about her belonged in the Bitterroots, especially not the scars. Old scars crossed her ribs and shoulders, not wilderness scars. Whip scars. Elias stared at them silently while heating water on the stove. Something ugly moved behind his ribs. Not pity. Something darker. The same feeling he used to get before putting down wounded wolves. The girl burned with fever through the night. Twice she woke swinging wildly at shadows that were not there. The second time, she nearly stabbed him with his own skinning knife before collapsing again. Elias locked the knife box after that. Near sunrise, she finally opened her eyes properly. Gray eyes, sharp even through exhaustion. She looked around the cabin once before her gaze landed on Elias standing near the stove. Her breathing changed immediately. Fast, small, cornered. Elias stayed where he was. "You're safe here," he said quietly. She glanced toward the door, then the windows, then the rifle hanging above the fireplace. Not fear, calculation, like she was measuring how long it would take to escape. "What's your name?" Elias asked. Silence. The girl pushed herself upright too quickly and gasped from pain. Her hands shook violently beneath the blankets. Elias stepped forward carefully and held out a tin cup of water. She stared at it, then at him. "You poison everything too?" she whispered. The words hit harder than a fist. Elias stood still for a moment before setting the cup down beside her without another word. Outside, the storm kept roaring through the mountains. Inside the cabin, silence stretched between them like pulled wire. Then the girl finally spoke again. Not softly this time. "If men come here asking questions," she said, gripping the blanket tightly enough for her knuckles to pale, "you never saw me." Elias studied her face in the firelight. Bruised throat, split lip, fear buried so deep it barely showed anymore. And underneath all of it, exhaustion so complete it looked permanent. He should have taken her to town. Should have ridden down the mountain before sunrise and handed her to the sheriff. That would have been the smart thing. Instead, Elias walked to the door and slid the heavy iron lock into place. Then he loaded his rifle. Because somewhere beyond the trees, deep in the dark Bitterroot wilderness, somebody had chained a young woman to a horse and sent her into a blizzard to die. And Elias Boone suddenly wanted to know why. Snow buried the cabin for 4 straight days after Evelyn arrived. The mountain disappeared behind white wind and frozen fog. Even the pine trees outside vanished beneath the storm. But the men hunting her did not stop searching. Elias discovered that on the 5th morning. He was splitting wood behind the cabin when he found horse tracks near the creek. 3 riders, heavy horses. Fresh. The snow around the tracks still crumbled soft beneath his gloves. Someone had climbed halfway into Blacktooth Ridge during a blizzard strong enough to kill trained hunters. That meant desperation, or obsession. Elias returned to the cabin without speaking. Evelyn sat near the fire, wearing one of his old wool shirts beneath a patched coat. Her bruises had started fading yellow along her jaw, though the iron collar still circled her neck like a wound that refused to heal. She watched his face carefully as he entered. What happened? Riders. The color drained from her cheeks immediately. How many? 3. She stood too quickly, nearly stumbling against the table. They found me. Elias grabbed her arm before she fell. The second his fingers touched her skin, she flinched hard enough to knock over the chair beside her. Both froze. Elias released her instantly. Something ugly crossed her face then. Not terror. Shame. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Elias looked away first. "You got nothing to apologize for." Outside, wind rattled the shutters again. Evelyn stared toward the windows, like she expected bullets to come through them at any second. Finally, she spoke. "He won't stop." "Who?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her fingers slowly rose to the iron collar around her throat. Walter Voss. The name meant nothing to Elias, but the way she said it made the cabin feel colder. "He owns silver mines south of Helena," Evelyn continued quietly. "Rail lines, too. Men call him a businessman." Her jaw tightened. "He buys girls." Elias stopped moving. The fire cracked softly between them. "When my father lost our ranch in a card debt, Voss offered to erase it." Her voice flattened strangely. He asked for me instead. Elias felt his grip tighten around the axe handle beside the wall. Evelyn noticed. It gets worse when they're angry, she said. And I ran. The words came apart after that. Fragments, locked rooms, chains, a burned maid who tried helping her escape, a cellar beneath a mining lodge, men disappearing after crossing Walter Voss. By the time she finished speaking, the fire had nearly burned to embers. Elias stared into the darkness outside the window. Then he stood silently and reached for his coat. Evelyn's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Hitching the sled." "No. I'm taking you farther north. He'll follow us. He's already following." "You don't understand who he is." Elias finally looked at her fully. His eyes carried something she had not seen before. Not anger. Decision. "I understand enough." They left before sundown. The storm eased just enough for travel, though snow still swallowed the trail in waist-high drifts. Elias loaded supplies onto a narrow trapping sled, while Evelyn rode his old mule behind him through the timber. The mountains changed after dark. Everything became sound. Branches snapping, ice shifting beneath snow, wind moaning through stone. 3 hours north of the cabin, Elias suddenly raised one hand. "Stop." Evelyn froze instantly. Then she heard it too. Dogs, far behind them. Tracking hounds. Her stomach dropped. "He brought hunters." Elias stepped off the trail and grabbed the mule's reins. "This way." They moved uphill through thick cedar groves, where moonlight barely reached the ground. Snow slid beneath Evelyn's boots, while frozen branches clawed at her sleeves. The dogs sounded closer now. Then came voices, men shouting through the trees. A gunshot cracked somewhere below. The mule panicked instantly. Its back legs slipped sideways near a narrow ravine. Evelyn screamed as the animal crashed sideways into deep snow, dragging her down with it. The slope gave way beneath them. Snow exploded around her. Branches tore across her face. Then nothing but violent rolling darkness. She slammed hard against a fallen pine at the bottom of the ravine. Pain shot through her ribs. Above her, snow kept falling from broken branches. For one terrible second, she thought Elias was gone. Then she heard him crashing downhill toward her. "Evelyn!" His voice echoed through the trees. She tried standing. A sharp cry escaped her mouth instantly. Her ankle twisted sideways beneath her weight. Elias reached her seconds later, breathing hard. "You hurt?" "I can walk." "You're lying." Another gunshot echoed closer now. The hound sounded almost on top of them. Elias looked uphill once, then down at her ankle. Then he crouched low. "Get on." Evelyn stared at him. "What?" "Now." "There's no time." "There is if you stop arguing." The dogs barked again. Closer. Evelyn climbed onto his back finally, wrapping both arms around his shoulders, while Elias rose through the snow with a strained grunt. He carried her uphill step by step, through darkness thick as coal smoke. The wind cut across the ridge hard enough to steal breath from their lungs. But Elias never slowed. Hours later, they reached an abandoned fire lookout built against a cliffside above the valley. Half the roof had collapsed years earlier. Still, it offered shelter. Elias barricaded the door with broken timber, while Evelyn sat wrapped in blankets near a tiny fire. Neither spoke for a long time. Outside, wolves howled somewhere deep below the ridge. Finally, Evelyn looked toward him. "Why are you helping me?" Elias kept sharpening his hunting knife slowly. "Maybe I got tired of burying people." The words landed heavily between them. Evelyn studied his face carefully in the firelight. For the first time since he found her, She noticed how exhausted he looked. Not tired, worn down from years of carrying something invisible. "You loved them very much," she said quietly. Elias stopped sharpening. Silence filled the room again. Then he nodded once. Just once. A sound suddenly echoed outside. Footsteps. Slow. Crunching through snow. Elias extinguished the lantern instantly. Darkness swallowed the lookout hole. Another step outside the door. Then a man's voice drifted through the freezing wind. "Walter says bring the girl back breathing." A second voice laughed softly. "But nobody said the mountain man matters." Elias slowly raised the rifle beside the fire. And beside him, Evelyn reached for the revolver lying on the floorboards. The first bullet came through the wall before sunrise. Wood exploded beside Evelyn's head. Elias fired back instantly. The rifle blast shook the tiny lookout tower hard enough to rattle snow from the ceiling beams. Outside, men scattered through the trees below the ridge. At least 4. Maybe more. Walter Voss had sent hunters this time, not deputies or hired drunks. Real killers. Evelyn crawled toward the broken window carefully and peeked through the gap in the boards. One man moved between the pines carrying a shotgun. Another climbed the ridge from the east side with a hunting rifle strapped across his back. "They're surrounding us," she whispered. Elias checked the revolver cylinder calmly. "How many bullets you fired before?" "Never at a person." "You aiming to survive?" Evelyn swallowed once, then nodded. "Good," Elias said quietly. "Then don't hesitate." Another shot ripped through the roof. Snow and splinters showered across the floorboards. The hunters started moving uphill fast now. They knew the lookout could not hold long. Elias moved toward the back wall and kicked open a narrow trap door hidden beneath broken blankets. Cold air rushed upward immediately. "There's an old logging path under the ridge," he said. "Leads west." "You knew about this place?" "I trapped here years ago. What about you?" "I'll slow them down." "No." Elias looked at her sharply. "You keep moving west until you hit the river. I'm not leaving you. You are, if you want to live." Outside, boots crunched closer through snow. A man shouted, "Last chance, Boone!" Then came another voice, smooth, calm, terrible. "Evelyn!" Her entire body locked instantly. She knew that voice. Walter Voss. Elias saw the change in her face immediately. Walter stepped into view beyond the trees wearing a long black winter coat dusted with snow. He looked nothing like the monster she described. That made him worse. Clean gloves, silver watch chain, perfect posture. The kind of man towns trusted instantly. He smiled toward the cabin windows. "You've caused a great deal of trouble," Walter called gently. "Come outside now, and I'll let the mountain man live." Evelyn stared through the cracks in the wall without breathing. Walter removed one glove slowly. His right hand carried burn scars across every finger. Scars Evelyn recognized immediately. The maid, the cellar, the screaming. Walter noticed her watching. His smile widened slightly. "You remember what happens when people disobey me." Elias raised the rifle. "Step closer and you'll find out what happens to you." Walter barely glanced toward him. "That girl belongs to me." "No," Elias said. The single word hit harder than a gunshot. Walter's expression changed for the first time. Not rage. Offense. Like a rich man being denied something he already purchased. Then he sighed softly. "Kill him." Gunfire exploded instantly. Bullets tore through the walls from 3 directions, while Elias shoved Evelyn toward the trap door. "Move!" She dropped through first. The tunnel beneath smelled like wet stone and frozen dirt. Elias fired twice more above her before jumping down beside her and slamming the hatch closed overhead. Darkness swallowed them whole. Then came footsteps above, heavy, fast. The hunters entered the lookout. Elias grabbed Evelyn's wrist and pulled her through the narrow tunnel, while dust drifted from the ceiling overhead. The passage twisted sharply downward beneath the ridge. Behind them, men shouted after discovering the escape route. Then came Walter's voice again. "Bring me the girl alive." The tunnel finally opened onto a steep canyon hidden beneath the mountain. Snow hammered sideways through the gorge, while icy river water crashed below the cliffs. Elias looked uphill once. "We keep moving." They crossed the canyon carefully along a fallen pine trunk slick with ice. Halfway across, gunshots erupted behind them. One bullet struck the log inches from Evelyn's feet. She slipped instantly. The world vanished beneath her. Evelyn screamed as freezing river water swallowed her whole. The current dragged her violently between rocks and broken ice. Then, strong hands caught her coat. Elias. He plunged into the river after her without hesitation. The freezing water slammed both against the canyon wall, hard enough to steal breath from their lungs. Elias shoved her toward shore while fighting the current with one arm. Another gunshot cracked above. Blood sprayed across the snow beside them. Evelyn looked up sharply. Elias staggered sideways in the river. The bullet hit his shoulder. "Elias!" He forced her toward shore again. "Run! I'm not leaving you!" The hunters appeared above the canyon ridge. Walter stepped forward beside them calmly. Snow whipped around his coat while he aimed a revolver downward. "You disappoint me, Evelyn." She stared at him across the canyon. For years that voice had owned her heartbeat, controlled her breathing, turned her into something small and silent. But now Elias stood bleeding in the river because of him. Something inside her changed. Walter raised the revolver toward Elias. Evelyn fired first. The gunshot echoed like thunder through the canyon. Walter jerked backward suddenly. Shock crossed his face before he collapsed into the snow near the cliff edge. Silence followed. One hunter ran instantly. Another dropped his rifle and backed away from the ridge. Nobody moved toward her anymore. Elias reached the shoreline slowly, blood running dark down his arm. Evelyn dropped the revolver and ran to him. He nearly collapsed against her from exhaustion. "You stubborn woman," he muttered weakly. A broken laugh escaped her suddenly through tears and shaking breath. Snow kept falling around them while the river roared below the canyon. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Elias lifted one freezing hand carefully against her face. Not to check for injuries, not to steady her, just to touch her. Evelyn leaned into his palm immediately, and somewhere deep in the Bitterroot Mountains, beneath endless snow and dark pine trees, two shattered souls finally stopped running from the dead things chasing them. Far above the canyon ridge, Walter Voss lay motionless beneath the falling snow. The storm covered him quickly, as if the mountain itself wanted him buried.